The Fed15 podcast is presented by Serving Those Who Serve, a financial planning practice serving federal government employees and retirees all over the country. This podcast is for informational purposes only and is not intended to be taken as financial advice. All listeners should consult their personal advisors before taking any action. The opinions expressed by our hosts are their own and do not reflect the views, policies, or position of either Raymond James or Serving Those Who Serve. Securities are offered through Raymond James Financial Services, Inc., member FINRA SIPC. Investment advisory services are offered through Raymond James Financial Services Advisors, Inc. Serving Those Who Serve is not a registered broker-dealer and is independent of Raymond James Financial Services, Inc. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's brand new episode of the Fed15 podcast presented by the team here at Serving Those Who Serve. Each week, we'll discuss the latest news and info that feds need to know in 15 minutes or less. So whether you are a seasoned federal employee or whether you're just starting out in your career, Fed15 has got you covered. So grab your coffee or your tea, if you're like me, nursing a little bit of a sore throat. Kick back and we will tell you what you need to know but might have missed in the federal space this week. I am your host, Katelyn Murray, and I am joined by a fabulous guest host. You've seen her on the podcast before. You know her. You love her. Miss Jen Meyer is joining us today.
Yay.
How's it going, Jen?
It's good. It's good. I feel like, it's a new season already, and I'm sorry you're not feeling great as part of that new season, but I'm excited for fall.
It is indeed a new season. So fall's actually one of my favorite seasons, if not my all-time favorite. I love the transition seasons. Spring, fall, feels like we don't have them for very long. But the season that I entered over the weekend was cold and flu season. So if you're kind of like me, I was just talking with Jen before we started recording. I have like this stack of supplements that I'll normally take throughout the winter that might help and might be just placebo effect. But I was talking about starting it early. And then over the weekend, of course, kismet, I came down with a little bit of a sniffle. So bear with me if my voice is a little bit hoarse today on today's episode. I've got some tea here that I'm nursing. But cold and flu season is definitely here early, folks. So if you're somebody who goes and gets the flu shot every year, you might want to consider expediting it this year because stuff's already going around.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Hopefully you feel better soon.
Fingers crossed, Hall's cough drops and Earl Grey tea are getting us through it. Well, on today's episode, we have some interesting pieces from the blog this week. We are going to talk, Jen actually is going to talk with us a little bit about an interesting piece that we had on federal pay and the 2025 pay raise versus inflation and kind of how government salaries are keeping up there. But before we get into kind of pay raise talk, I wanted to talk a little bit about a piece that we've got on the blog this week on the federal contractor advantage and when you might, consider making a transition into contracting from the federal government. Now, currently, there are, I would say, a higher than normal amount of feds who are looking into potentially making a change given all of the kind of, could we call it instability with federal government employment that we have seen this year. And we do see this fairly often with government downsizing initiatives. It spurs interest in contracting, which is a route that many of our feds go when they do decide to retire. And there's lots of different reasons why feds consider contracting either after their federal career or as maybe a mid-career shift. Some classic kind of push-pull analysis here for anybody who has ever attended a business class are pull factors that would pull somebody into contracting, higher pay, flexible or remote work, very much, a rarity nowadays in federal government employment.
It's a big deal these days.
Right. And then, of course, specialized projects that you may be interested in working on. Some of the push factors, so these are factors that would be pushing folks out of federal government employment, burnout, return to the office mandates, long commutes, limited promotions. That hiring freeze and freeze on promotions is kind of difficult for some of our feds to manage. And of course, there's always demand in the private sector for federal government employees' expertise, particularly with regard to compliance, mission priorities, and agency processes. So that's kind of what makes feds attractive to contracting firms. Now, looking at kind of how contracting compares to federal government, contractors often out-earn federal employees when it comes to just overall pay, gross pay, we could say, particularly in the fields of tech, cyber, and defense. Now, when we get into benefits, the story is very different, right? Federal government employees, as I'm sure you know, because we prattle on about it all the time on this podcast, you guys have a wonderful benefits package. Confusing, yes. Lots of nuance, yes.
Yes.
But an incredible benefits package. Jen, I joke all the time with Dan that like, I'm going to get in with one of my clients and I'm going to get them to land me that 5-year gig at the end of my career so that I can retire with FEHB.
Yeah, 100%. I think we all talk about that.
Right? Yeah, that's the move there. So, but obviously FEHB being able to carry health insurance into retirement, particularly prior to Medicare, that is a huge benefit. Your first pension, generous leave, job security, all of these are kind of pieces of your benefit plan. I know that last one is feeling a little unsteady in 2025, but it's real. Yeah. We do have to acknowledge it. It is real. As a contractor, though, on the other side of that coin, your benefits are going to vary. It depends on the contracting firm that you're working with. Some do offer some more competitive benefits, like a 401k, perhaps with a match, strong healthcare plans. Others really have minimal benefits, and they're kind of getting you in, kind of focused only on that pay. If you think about kind of how the contractors are structured and the fact that many of our clients retire with full retirement from federal service and then start work as a contractor, for those people, it's not important to have really great healthcare because they've already secured their FEHB, right? So that's why you see such a wide variance there between contracting firms. When it comes to retirement, obviously on the federal side, you guys know you got your three-legged stool, you got Social Security, which you'll have either way, pension and TSP. As a contractor, your retirement savings is 401k based. There is no guaranteed pension there. So you are in the world of the private sector schmucks like us, where pensions are very, very, very much a rarity. As far as stability goes, in general, so maybe outside of 2025, but in general, in a federal career, you've got a fair degree of career security. You've got steady progression. You kind of can see the steps. The pay is a little bit more transparent. As a contractor, often your advancement is tied to projects or funding cycles, which makes it a whole lot less predictable, just kind of on average. Now, if you are somebody who is thinking about potentially making a move to the contracting side of things, let's talk a little bit about when it makes sense to make that move. In general, mid to late, and I would actually put the emphasis here on late career feds, benefit the most from shifting from direct federal employment over to contracting. It's because of what we talked about going back to if you're vested for retirement and you are vested in your benefits and you can take things like FEHB with you, right? That is a huge, huge, huge leg up. And then you can kind of negotiate when you go to the contracting firm just on the bottom line income that you're going to be drawing. You don't need, kind of things that can be expensive for companies like giving you health insurance, right? You're bringing your own. It's similar to what we see with folks who are in the military who then look at, careers as contractors. That's another kind of path to contracting. If you've already got TRICARE, you don't need your new employer to give you health insurance. And so you can leverage that as a bargaining tool to increase that gross salary because they are saving so much money on not insuring you. The higher income so assuming that you are a late career Fed who's already fully vested in your FEHB, you can take that with you. You can get your pension. Assuming that that's where you're at, sometimes the higher income that you can get as a contractor can outweigh reduced future pension accruals, particularly if you are already at that age 62 and 20 years of service, and you've got your 1.1 times pension multiplier. Every year that you tack on past that point, there is an increase, right? But it's possible that with some creative and savvy financial planning, you could leverage a higher gross annual salary for a couple years to kind of make up that difference. Contracting works best when you have already established strong retirement savings, whether that's through TSP, whether that's through IRA, Roth IRA portfolio. You want to kind of have a good ground for, your retirement funding before you go into contracting. And it's really attractive to those who are seeking flexibility, variety, and project-based work. Some key milestones that you might want to look at: when does your pension vest? Your first service credit, again, that 1.1 times pension multiplier, you definitely want that ideally. And then FEHB eligibility for retirement. So those are kind of some flex points that you want to look at. Again, it's going to be an individual decision, just like everything we talk about on this podcast. Some of the pros are you can make a higher income, you've got flexibility, you've got more professional options, wider network, I would say. And some of the cons are potential loss of pension security. Again, if you're fully vested, then you don't lose that. Possible gaps in healthcare. Again, if we're fully vested, we don't lose that. And potentially less job stability. So that's why we say, make sure that you've got strong retirement savings already established before you're going into kind of the wild world of contracting. So if this is something that you're interested in, some action steps, we like to give you actionable pieces of information here. Run the numbers, look at your income versus benefits trade-off, protect your benefits, make sure that you're planning for FEHB coverage and retirement savings gaps, and then prepare financially. Make sure that you've got a cash buffer in place for that transition, set transition milestones, and move when you're stable, not out of fear or frustration. That last point is really important in 2025 because I know a lot of people have had a lot of job, change ups. We're hearing a lot of frustration from our clients. Jen, I know you're hearing it as well.
Yes.
But you want to make sure that when you are making a step forward in your future, you are making that step forward out of solid planning and guidance and not out of, fear or frustration or anger. Often when we're emotional, we don't make great decisions. So if you need some help looking at those numbers, if you're listening to this saying, well, I'm kind of interested in it, but I don't know when would be the right time to make that move, feel free to hit us up, meetings@stwserve.com. We would be happy to help you run those numbers. I will say that the calculating the value of your benefits versus the face amount of a gross salary, sometimes those gross salary numbers can look really shiny and we underestimate the cost of our benefits. If you need help with that, you probably want to work with somebody who is able to kind of do that analysis for you. We're happy to do that. You can hit us up at meetings@stwserve.com for some guidance there. Okay, so that's that on contracting. Jen, tell me how my 2025 federal pay raise is stacking up, assuming that I am, not moving around to become a contractor and I'm staying with the good old federal government.
Yeah. Well, and absolutely, Katelyn, funny. I heard a little bit of your voice towards the end there, but you sounded great. So
yeah, awesome.
The tea is working.
Thank you.
So yeah, but absolutely. And it's such an important, it's a great tie-in with the federal contracting space right now, because so many of our feds are having a difficult year in 2025. I'm going to talk a little bit about the pay raise that you received in 2025, and very important to understand how that pay raise is connected to inflation, right? And I know we talk about this all the time, but I often find when I meet with somebody for the first time, this is something that a lot of people aren't thinking about, right?
Mm-hmm.
So everybody loves a pay raise, right? Everybody loves a pay raise.
Oh yeah.
Everybody hates inflation. Right. And so particularly in the federal government space. So let's kind of start with the basics, right? So 2025, the average federal employee pay raise was about 4.5%. It's actually one of the largest in recent years.
Yeah.
However, inflation, of course, has been kind of persistent for the last couple of years, and particularly in housing, healthcare, and groceries, right? So these are our everyday staples. I mean, they are part of every single Fed's everyday life. Whether you're a contractor or you work in the private sector outside of contracting, these are big issues, the inflation problem that we've had over the last 2 years, last really 3 to 5 years. Bottom line, of course, you'd rather get the pay raise than not. The pay raises, I think, in many ways have helped people stay afloat, but they certainly aren't necessarily helping people get ahead. And one of the interesting comparisons that we did was we looked at the federal pay raise versus what are people getting in the private sector, right? And so in the private sector, the average pay raise was 5% and even more for some. And particularly in the tech, finance, and healthcare areas, the pay raises were higher. Right. And one of the things that I think is important to understand when we're talking about federal versus the private sector is that in the private sector, raises are often used to retain talent and therefore often keep better pace because of that the market demands those higher raises. So just something to be aware of. Again, inflation's a problem for everybody, but I think also people tend to get very focused on the short term, and I want to help people start really thinking about it more in the long term, right? So again, 4.5% sounds like a really good number, but what happens as you go through your career as a federal employee? And oftentimes those pay raises are not really keeping up with inflation. Whether inflation's high or even if it's lower, they still typically aren't. And one of the things we see is that for mid-career employees, that's really where it starts to become more of a people getting left behind, right? So because of the way the GS schedule works, once you're kind of mid-career, your pay is flattening out somewhat. And it's also important that, advancement isn't as easy when you get further into your federal career usually. And finally, the locality pay adjustments, right? So particularly in high cost of living areas like California, like DC, we're based in the DC metro area. We know this to be true, right? Even the locality pay is not keeping up with that true cost of inflation. So what does it mean, right? And ultimately, what can we do to put ourselves in a good position to handle this problem, right? And as we talked about, right, sometimes people will say, well, I'm just going to leave the government and I'm going to go get a higher paid job someplace else. But that oftentimes can be a problem if you're leaving behind some of the very valuable federal benefits, right? So when we talk about the federal benefits, one of everybody's favorites is the TSP, right? And I tell people all the time, the way that you can stay ahead of inflation long term is with your TSP. It is so important that you are getting the most out of your TSP at whatever contribution level you're currently at, but also to always have a goal of increasing that contribution level every year. Even if the pay raise isn't very big, it will help you years down the road, not necessarily in the short term, but again, the power of compounding in your TSP it's so valuable, but you have to be making those contributions and you have to increase those contributions as best you can. Another tip, I think that's something that often goes under the radar, is the other thing with TSP that a lot of people aren't using right now that they really should be is the ability to contribute to Roth TSP. Tax rates right now are still historically low, and it is a great opportunity to put money into the Roth TSP. That money will grow tax-free for you and will be tax-free when you take it out they have to be qualified distributions, but most people can meet those to make it qualified, and not having to pay taxes in retirement will be a huge benefit to you. So that's one thing. The other thing that, really is so important, and people say to me all the time when I go through the numbers, I had no idea, right? So you have to understand what the numbers actually are. And to do that, you can have your numbers run, right? And again, when you get your estimates either through HR or through GRB or whatever the internal platform that you use, those numbers often pertain only to the first year of retirement. And so you really need to have your numbers run in a way that will take account not just for year one, but years 5, 10, 15, 20, 30, right? For some people, they will be retired for 30 plus years. And that's really where inflation can have a huge impact, because once you're not working, you're getting cost of living adjustments, of course, on your pension, but even those cost of living adjustments typically are not keeping up. So really, really important. Finally, of course, people need to be open to evaluating other positions and things like that will give them more than just whatever the cost of living increase is, right? Whether that's inside or outside of the government, but particularly within the government, be always looking, be open to new opportunities. So I guess kind of summing it up, the inflation problem is not just a short-term problem, it's a long-term problem. And people need to be thinking about it, planning for it. I know, Katelyn, we all, with our clients and all the federal employees we interact with, we really try to give you the best information and education so that you can make really good decisions about how to plan for these risks. And as you mentioned, right, you can sign up for meetings and discussions with us via the Ask STWS at STWServe email, and we're happy to help, happy to be a resource.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
I think what's critical there, Jen, and you highlighted it perfectly, but I think, yes, definitely look at the pay raise numbers versus inflation as the cost of kind of everything, bread, milk, eggs, is getting more and more expensive. Definitely look at that. But then two, when you're looking at long term, you mentioned the GRB report, looking at just that first year of retirement. Well, yeah, sure, that looks great. But what has inflation done to your necessary spending over the 30 years maybe that you're planning to be retired? And that's where you really need those more sophisticated tools that, a Fed-focused CFP, certainly the team here at Serving Those Who Serve, have, where we can take that GRB report, we can pull the data from that, and we can show you what 30 years into the future looks like. And also, factoring in things, not just your federal pension, but Social Security, factoring in some sort of drawdown from your TSP or from your investment portfolio. And then also helping you figure out, how you can manipulate those figures, right? If we work a year longer, what does that do? If we get the 1.1 times pension multiplier, what does that do? If we're open to part-time work for 5 years after retirement,
Yeah.
if you retire as a Fed at 57 or 60, you work 5 years, you're still retiring pretty early in the grand scheme of things, depending on, what your health looks like. But your picture could look radically different, because even if, the important point you made about the TSP, even if your TSP is keeping pace with inflation, the taxes on the pre-tax portion of your TSP,
Yes,
also are a factor. So now we got to worry about not just keeping pace with inflation, we got to also keep ahead of taxes so that, we can have our proper cash flow. So really, really good point there. Highly recommend folks check out that article. I think it is pretty eye-opening, not just, as Jen said, in the short term, but really in the long term for your planning. Well, I want to thank everyone for joining us for today's episode. I want to thank my lovely co-host, Jen. I thoroughly enjoyed it. We'll have you on another episode soon, and we will be back next week.
Be sure to subscribe to our podcast on our YouTube channel and Spotify so you never miss an episode. And please remember to share it with your friends and colleagues. I know statistically about 78% of our people come at the suggestion of a friend or colleague. So please share our information.
Yeah, boost the signal. It definitely helps feed the algorithm, which is what we're all trying to do in 2025. For more information on the topics covered in today's show and more, be sure to check out our blog at blog.stwserve.com. While you're there, you can subscribe to our newsletter, The Weekly Serving, to get all the latest news and updates for Feds delivered straight to your inbox every week.
All right. And finally, make sure that you are paying attention to the upcoming webinars. So I know We have Social Security coming up on September 16th, and we have our VERA, voluntary early retirement, and VSIP. Obviously, that's been a hot topic this year. And I'm actually hearing a lot of rumors from people that there's probably more VERAs coming next year. So you want to make sure that you're aware and know all the rules and regulations around that. So please, again, sign up for those webinars. And Katelyn, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Of course. Thank you for co-hosting with me, Jen. Thanks to everyone for listening to the Fed15. I'm Katelyn Murray, and we will see you next week.
Bye.